All right. So let's talk about marriage and family therapy assessment. One of the first things to realize is that when we talk about, I'm going to tell you guys a little bit of some differences between being just an LPC or an LMFT. There's a lot of crossover, but then there's some key differences too. And one of the biggest differences is that the basis of LMFT work is systems theory. Now, not that anybody can use systems theory in your work, but that's the core guiding theory of LMFTs. So systems, I'm going to give you like the 5-minute overview. That's we could spend a lot of time talking about. It comes from general systems theory that's been around quite a while, actually. It's in the hard sciences. Systems theory is used for lots of different things, and actually, systems theory itself is now used in a lot of technologies. For example, I did some consulting for a software company in Florida earlier this year, and one of the chief innovation officer has been doing, he's a former nurse, and he had been doing a lot of tech type of work for a long time. He worked in LA County as a nurse and then transitioned into the tech world. And he's actually been doing technology and healthcare for almost 30 years. And as he was talking, he started talking about some of his theories that he's kind of experienced. And one of them was systems theory. So systems theory is actually fairly robust, and it actually can be used for lots of things. For example, in your car, when you set a cruise control, that's systems theory, right? So there's a stimulus that comes in that tells something to adjust to something else. And when one part of the system adjusts, the rest of the parts of the system are affected. Okay, that's general systems. If we translate that into human nature or human relations or human communication, what that means is if you and I are having a conversation, there's something going on in my head and there's something going on in your head, right? We're talking. But then there's something going on between us too. There's a process that's happening that we don't necessarily see, but we can see. It's nonverbal in a lot of ways. And so if, for example, I say something that triggers you, whatever that is, and when I say trigger, it doesn't have to be negative, it could be happy or sad or angry or whatever, joyful, then I've said something that actually has an impact on the system now, right? So if you think about a husband and wife or partners, if someone says something and the other person hears it, maybe they hear it as criticism, they're going to react defensively, right? And then they'll kind of respond like that. Same thing in a family. Like, for example, anxiousness in a family, like mom and dad become anxious about something, could be anything. The kids can feel anxiousness, like you can feel it in the family. That's systems theory, basically. So something that happens to one part happens to the whole. It spreads. So the good thing about that is if you make changes to one part, you make changes to the whole. That's the theory, right? Now you have to actually practice it, and you have to do interventions that actually make that happen. And so when I'm working with, the reason why I like systems theory and working with people, first of all, it lines up with attachment theory for me really well. So when I talk about connections and interactions and safety in those interactions, that lines up really well with what I do. But when we think about how we can help those interactions be the best that they can be, most of psychology is always focused on the behavior of the individual for the most part. Systems theory focuses mostly on the interactions between the two parties or the family. And obviously you're doing a little bit of both, but you're mainly focusing on the interactions. Does that make sense? And I'll give you an example. If I'm having a session with a couple, and this actually for me works face-to-face or video. I pretty much do the same thing. If I ask one of them a question and they're talking, and the other one has a reaction, which is nonverbal, unless they say something out loud. And and again, that reaction doesn't have to be negative. It could be positive, any kind of reaction. Well, that's an interaction that I'm going to bring up, like, hey, I noticed when you said this, this happened. Or I noticed when this happened, you said this, right? So if we can change how those interactions happen, in other words, when I work with a couple, I'm trying to help them realize that they can turn to each other, not away from each other. And the ways that we do that is help some of those interactions become more healthy, more positive, and more connective. So again, that's just a really 30,000 foot view. We can get into the weeds of it. And there's tons of really good information out there on systems theory. Another kind of big theory that now that a lot of LMFTs are using is polyvagal theory. Is kind of a new look at a new twist on systems theory. There's a lot. I have colleagues that are really modern in their approaches and use like heavy duty modern approaches that use a lot of systems theory. And then I've got colleagues that are really postmodern in their approach. And the great thing about systems theory is it can fit either one of those areas. So that's really good. So when we think about assessing marriages and families, what we're trying to assess beyond just individual issues, we're trying to assess the interactional patterns between the two people, which sounds good on paper. The problem is, how do you assess an interaction that there's really, honestly, no really good assessment designed to assess what's called process, right? We can assess the content, in other words, the things people think and the things people might say. We can assess that really well with individuals, but the content or the process between them is really hard to assess other than through observation. So in other words, to give them a pencil paper assessment, it's not really going to give you all the process information. It'll give you information. It'll give you good information. It'll give you things about how they interact with each other, how they communicate, how they do conflict, things like that. And those are good. Those are good things, but it doesn't give you a lot of really good information about the process between them. Does that make sense? Because if you can assess if you can change that process, you can make big changes to the whole. Sum is not greater than the sum part. The whole is not greater than the sum of its parts, right? That's kind of the idea. So, for example, when I work with a couple, and it sometimes takes me a little while to understand their interactions because they can be kind of complex from time to time. But I'll give you an example of a common interactional pattern that happens with couples. And this is probably true just in human nature in general. So if you have let's say a couple that are interacting with each other, it's really common for one of them at some point, especially if the interactions get negative or get really escalated or get really anxious or frustrating, for one of them to pull away. And that makes this person want to do what? Follow, which makes this person pull away, which makes this person follow. That's a common interaction. Okay. So in that way, if we can keep this person engaged and not pull away, that would be helpful. If we can help this person not pursue, but just stay engaged, but not pursue, that's helpful, right? So but that process between them is that interaction. So what's happening between them that's influencing the pull away or the pursuit? So it's withdraw, pursue is what that actual interaction is called. That's an example of common interactions. That right there, you can see pretty quickly with people, because you can tell when they're talking, if they escalate, even in the session, as they escalate, eventually one of them will just stop and the other person will keep going. Because you can tell if someone stops talking, the other person might even turn to them and keep talking to them, like physically turn. You can see that happen. But those are all observations that you kind of look at and you can see. One of the ways that I try to coach my couples is I usually say, you guys have become experts at this negative pattern. We want to make you an expert at something else that's more positive, more healthy, that's better for you. Because once you can help them kind of stay engaged with each other without pursuing or withdrawing, they can really continue to really turn toward each other. So having said that, there are other things that you can do and right now I'm just talking about observational things. There are some observational things that you can do. For example, if you notice that one or both of them, and this is true for families, couples, doesn't matter who, if one or both of them is very critical, like comes across as criticizing, at the heart of criticism typically is some kind of unfelt or unfulfilled need most of the time. Well, criticism typically will cause some kind of defensiveness in the other person. And that in and of itself just starts a really bad cycle. If criticism and defensiveness continues on for long enough, then eventually we'll get some kind of stonewalling, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a kind of an emotional tune out. And a lot of times if you hear couples, and even on the intake, they'll say things like, we're roommates. That's a lot of stonewalling probably happening. A lot of criticism's probably been happening for a long, long time. And then the fourth, these are called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It's a John Gottman research term. When we have contempt between people, that's when you have simultaneous like disrespect and dislike, and then it becomes an attack on character and personality and gets really vicious. When you have all 4 of those working together, those are the 4 biggest predictors of divorce. So you might have couples or families even come in that could display all 4 of those at the same time, or a couple of those. That could happen. And a lot of times, it depends on the time frame that we're talking about. But all of those are observational or observations you can make with couples or families to see if those things are happening. And you can ask questions along the way. Like I said a while ago, hey, I noticed when you said this, it seems like this happened, or it seems like your response was this way. Tell me how you're feeling. The other way you can find out is if I'm talking to Stephen and Stephen's telling me something that's upsetting to him, let's say, or frustrating to him, and Eric hears one thing that triggers him, he's like, well, he'll stop listening to everything else. And instead of taking responsibility for some of that, he will just start blaming Stephen. And he'll say, no, he does this, and he'll start blaming him and not take responsibility. That's the defensiveness part, right? You can see it. You can see it fairly easily.
Stephen and I go through that all the time.
Yeah, that's why I picked you guys. That's what I figured. That was y'all's common pattern. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Those are real, and the longer you work with people, the more it just jumps out. Like even now, I can't stop myself from even just in like gatherings, hearing things, like I just can't, it just jumps out. You just can't, you just hear it, And so the question I always get is, what do you do about that? Well, you have to really take your time and slow down, because the person that feels criticized is defensive, which means they need to take a little bit of responsibility for something, not all of it, but for something. But if they're hearing criticism, the other person, like Stephen, might not be saying it in a critical way, but it's being heard that way. But if you can switch the language to a lot more I statements than you statements, you automatically change the discussion. It becomes less criticizing, less defensive. And not a lot of that you can do super early on with people, actually. And that just gives them a little bit of, takes a little bit of the weight off. So having said that, those are kind of observational things that you can do. with people. I'm going to try. I think I'm going to try and share a couple of things here if I can find what I'm looking for. You guys have any questions about any of that stuff so far? Most of that should be fairly straightforward.
You said earlier there were the 4 telltale signs of divorce. Is you called it the 4 horsemen, right?
Right. Yeah. 4 horsemen of the apocalypse is what Dr. Gottman calls them. So it's criticism and defensiveness and stonewalling and contempt. And when you see those, when you start seeing those, you know exactly what to start working on. And and a lot of times they might, I don't know that it even does good to be like, hey, you guys are doing this. Because they don't care. They don't care. They just want to not do something, right? They just want relief. So you can immediately go start to work on, which if you see all 4 of those, you know, there's a ton of hurt, a lot of pulling away, a lot of maybe even like, I'm not even sure I'm into this. So you need to really de-escalate and take your time. And here's the hard part about doing marriage and family therapy, just like doing any kind of counseling. People want this to be fixed very quickly. Right?
Yeah.
And it's just not possible because more than likely, they didn't get here within 2 or 3 sessions. Like they didn't get to this place in 2 or 3 weeks. They got here over years, more than likely. And so part of what you're doing is trying to semi-convince them, look, this is going to take a little while. One of the number one, I do 30-minute consultations before I see new clients now on purpose, because I want to see if it's a good fit. Number one. Number two, I give them a chance to ask questions. And one of the main questions I get would be, how long does this take? How many sessions is this? How long is this going to take? Even they'll say, in your experience, blah, and fill in the blank. How long will this take? And it's a really difficult thing to answer because I've worked with some couples over a couple of years, and I've worked with some couples over 3 or 4 months. If I'm being honest, if I had my way, I would say, let's spend 12 months together. And here's what that would look like. We would do the first 6 months would be this. The next 3 months would be this. And the last 3 months would be this. That's what I would do. I think 12 months is a minimum to me. It takes a lot of time for things to change. And depending on the stage of change that they're at, it can take a long time. And it depends on if they're motivated, if they want to change, kind of what the state of their relationship is, all of those things.
What tactic do you normally take if, for example, you have a couple that comes in and you can tell one of them is like really wanting to try to work on it, and one of them is basically checked out. Like they've almost decided, like, come to the conclusion, like, this is not, or they maybe just want the divorce, but they're too afraid to come out and say it for whatever reason, but like you can tell as the counselor. Does that make sense?
So you're asking what do I do, or what if someone doesn't appear motivated or doesn't seem like they want to work on something? Or
yeah, if you've got one spouse that's really like all about trying to do it, and then the other one is completely unmotivated, I mean, what do you usually do at that point?
Yeah, that's like 50 or 60% of everybody. So it's a great question, and one I never thought about until I started doing this. So that's one of the reasons why I started doing consultations, is to kind of feel that out too. For example, I did a consultation about 6 months ago with a couple that, 6 months ago, 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 with a couple that, 6 months ago appeared to want to work on it. Even during the time we were talking, they appeared to want to work on it, but they didn't seem like gung-ho to make an appointment. And I kind of told them how I work, and I kind of got the feeling that they weren't feeling it. I said, guys, this is how I work, and this is here's what I would expect. And, what do you expect? And we kind of talked about that. And I said, if this doesn't match what you guys are wanting, then maybe let me help you find someone else, or, it's okay. It doesn't hurt my feelings. I mean, I don't come right out and say, you're never going to make it. You guys aren't into it. I'm never going to do that. I'll say it in a good, soft way. But in my experience, if a wife calls, I always want to know if the husband knows that she's calling, because a lot of times she thinks there's a problem, and there might be a problem. There probably is a problem, and the husband might not know. Now, a lot of the times the husband's on board too, and that's cool. It's no big deal. And I can find that out really quickly. If a husband calls me, something bad has happened, usually. Like something's going on and they need to get in like tomorrow or today. Like that's my experience. That's not 100% of the time, but it's a high percentage. And that's the other reason why I started doing consultations, is to feel some of those things out. So to answer your question, if I'm in sessions and it's apparent that they're not sure, I will ask them. And I'm a postmodern therapist, so I will oftentimes share like, hey, here's where I'm at. Here's what I'm feeling. I'm feeling stuck, or I feel a little bit helpless right now, or I'm not sure which direction we need to go. Not because I don't know what to do, but because I'm not sure where you guys are. Help me understand where you're at right now. And that just opens the door for them to talk about it if they want. And so, having said that, there is a newish brand of counseling for couples called discernment counseling. And by new, I mean within the last 5 or 6 years, which is really new. You can actually get certified in this. It's actually really effective and very helpful. And what it does is exactly what it says. It helps you discern if you want to stay married or not. Because up until recently, it's been either marriage counseling or nothing, right? It's all or nothing. And some couples don't know. There's a high possibility that they're going to therapy and they're not all into therapy because they're not even sure if they want to be married or not. So discernment counseling really focuses on making a decision to stay married or not. And if we just say, yeah, you know what? We want to stay married, then we transition to actual marital therapy and trying to fix something. Or we say, no, we really don't. And so that is another avenue that I have referred people to. There's some really good discernment counseling practices here in DFW. Again, it's a super new. Anything within the last 5 or 6 years is pretty new. So it's a super new form of counseling. It's not therapy because it's not really therapeutic in nature. It's more like helping them make a decision. So it's asking questions, helping them think through it. You do some individual work, you do some couples work. And typically it's a time frame. Most discernment counseling, when you go, they'll say, hey, I need at least a 6-month commitment to this, if not more, but 6 months usually is the minimum. And people say, yep, we'll try for 6 months. And at the end of that 6 months, then we'll make some decision or not. And so it's a lot more structured in the approach too. Other than that, sometimes people just stop coming, or they'll just not show up because they'll just be, out of it. And then I've got there's times too where if I'm forthright and say, hey, I'm not sure where, how are we doing? What's going on? I'm not sure if I'm helping you. Tell me if I'm helping, how am I helping, that kind of thing. And sometimes we need to just change directions because what we're doing is not working. We can do that too. It's just a lot of feel, I think, when you get to that point. And a lot of it is, if I'm being honest, sometimes it's because one of them might be having an affair at the time. They could be involved with someone else. That could be happening too. I mean, there's lots of reasons, but it's just, I think it's okay to be, if that's your style, if part of your style is being open as a therapist, that's fine. If it's not, you don't have to. Because I usually tell couples when we start, like, I'm going to keep going until you tell me to stop. You know, we're going to keep working and work on it. So Jared, does that answer your question? That's a super long answer.
Oh yeah, no, it does. And it makes sense too that, like, I mean, I'd imagine that's usually like the case more often than not. That's why I asked that.
It really is. It really is. Now the majority of couples I work with are there for the right reason. They want to work. They want to fix their relationship. Like 90% of them, or at least 85% of them. And then there's a small percentage that this is like checking a box. On average, couples wait 4 to 5 years too long to go to therapy, which is kind of a long time. And then they get to you and you're kind of like the last resort. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about some more, a little more structured, formal ways to assess. And so I'm going to pull up a slide here just to show you guys. Where did I put it? Let me see where I put it. Hang on just 1 second. I think I moved it. You guys ever rearrange all your stuff on your computer and then you don't know where it is? Literally just happened to me. Okay. So one way, we talked about projective techniques on Thursday. Mapping techniques is something that can be used in marriage and family therapy. So especially with families, and it's a collaboration. Basically, especially when you work with families, you kind of become part of the system, like their family system, and you collaborate with the members of the family. And depending on the method or model of therapy you use, you could be kind of the expert still, or you could be part of just the family's the expert. It just depends on your model. And you're trying to get information about dynamics, which could be communication or conflict, roles, secrets, unwritten expectations, written expectations, all of those things. So the first one is genograms. Genograms are a great way to understand. Basically, you can look at 3 generations of someone's family history. So it's kind of like a family tree on steroids. So you would list the family tree, and then you would talk about all the interactional patterns that might happen in those generations. When I do a full genogram, it takes me at least a session, sometimes 2 sessions, depends on how many people, especially if it's with a couple, it'll take me 2, maybe 3 sessions to do. It really helps. Yeah. Yes. Sorry.
Your screen is overlapped on my side. So
Okay.
it's got a really cool, smaller, tiny image of you in the corner, but I don't know if anybody else is having that issue. So I can't actually see your slide.
Does anybody else have the same problem?
No, I can see it.
No, I can see it. I don't know if are you on your phone, Marcy? Could be the phone.
No, but I'll try and close some stuff. No worries.
I'll put this up online so you can have it too.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
The way you map it out can help you identify like cross-generational transmissions, what it's called. So things like anxiety and depression can even be passed down from generation to generation. Addiction issues can be passed down from generation, just like positive, healthy family habits can be passed down from generation to generation. And a lot of times people can't see that until they see it in front of them on paper. It helps you kind of make some interpretations of the dynamics of the family and gives you a really good example of family history. There hasn't been a lot of good studies on the reliability and validity of genograms, mainly because it's so focused in one field of study. Really, it's really only in the MFT field that people use it for the most part. But I will say this, that in my experience with it, again, this is like everything else. We have to make interpretations. So anytime we do that, there's always room for error. That's for sure. That's why you try to make all observations very soft and kind of like, hey, this is what it looks like, kind of language, kind of one down approach to it. And you want to do it and let the client see what you're doing and what you discover, and let them see and give feedback. And so a lot, it's part gathering fact, it's fairly structured at the beginning, and then it becomes a little unstructured after you get it mapped out, and then you start asking questions about it. I did a genogram with a lady. Well, this has been a long time ago. I've done a bunch of these, but this one really sticks out to me. She was the third generation of got pregnant at 17 or 18, was involved with a substance abusing man who's also physically abusing, and eventually was left like in their early 20s. She was the third generation that had happened to. And this particular session, when we were going through it, she had asked her daughter to come, which I'd said, this is some of this stuff we're going to talk about can be sensitive. And she said, no, I want her to see. Her daughter pointed out, she said, Mom, I don't want this to be the fourth generation. This girl was 13. She was like 3 or 4 years away from repeating this pattern. And it was very eye-opening for that family, and caused a lot of really good, helpful discussions to happen. And a lot of really good, really positive things came out. Like the mom really didn't realize that she had such a bad relationship with her parents, her dad and her mom, that she really needed attention, and that she got it from guys. And her mom did the same thing, and her daughter was starting to do some of the same things. And we could flip flop this over, and the same thing could be happening with on the male side. They could be seeking attention in that way too. This just happened to be a mom I was talking about. So this never would have come out if we hadn't have done this genogram, and we really mapped it out and let her really take a good look at it. So a genogram can be really helpful in assessing dynamics, especially, multi-generation. Family sculpting, we talked about this a little bit, or I mentioned it last on Thursday. I use family sculpting with families, obviously. And I've done it even with a family of 7. I did this one time with, which was really cool. The great thing about family sculpting is a couple of things. It lets every member of the family have a voice in what their family might look like, how they interact. And so basically you are the kind of potter, so to speak. You are the sculptor, and you choose a member of the family that tells you where to place family members that symbolize the relationship. Sometimes you could take, an interaction that they commonly have. Like, I don't know, sometimes I'll say, hey, tell me, like, here's your scenario, what everyone does at night. I'll just make that up sometimes, and have one member of the family place people in the room, use the whole room, place people where they usually are in reference to everyone else. And you can have them turn their back to them. You can have them turning to each other. You can have them separated. You can have them in groups. And if you can imagine, it's a lot of times a little different and a little nuanced based on the family member. This is another way to look at how the family system kind of operates, based on a given situation, scenario. You could look at, there's lots of different ways to do this. That's only a couple of different ways to do that. But that again gives you lots of really good information, and you can really start assessing the dynamics of a family that way. I mentioned this super early on, like I'm not opposed to using like some of the instruments we talked about on Thursday, even for individuals, especially like personality type things. I'm not opposed to those. The problem is they don't give you all the information on the dynamics of the interactions. It gives you some good information on the individuals. Even things like, for example, the prepare and enrich, which is the prepare is a premarital assessment, which you have to be certified to do, which you can do. When you have you can do it. Actually, you can start working on that now. I do too. I do prepare and I do Symbus are the two that I usually do. Prepare does a really good job of premarital evaluation. Even that is those are individually answered questions that you then pull together and have conversations about. The marital satisfaction inventory revised is a very good one. I use this I've started using something different in the last 2 or 3 years, but this one's a very good one. This one gives a lot of really good information about communication, especially on a broad range of what this says, like relationship issues like conflict, money, parenting, sex. I think I said conflict, communication. And what it does is it actually, I've got one around here, but I cleaned my office recently and I need to find out where I put it. It gives you information on a scale, and the scale is color coded. And the more red the final number is, the more issue they're having there. And you can kind of map it out, and then you can show it to them. You're not really saying, hey, I noticed. You're showing them the results of the assessment. This one's a very good one. The dyadic adjustment scale has been around a long time. I'm fairly certain you can find versions of this online, but all of these now you have to purchase, pretty much all of these. But all of these that we're talking about tonight, you can give any of those because they come with a manual. And as a master's student, you can give any of these assessments. Excuse me. When it comes to families, probably the most thorough, the most traditionally thorough and successful and most reliable assessment is this FACES for family adaptability and cohesion evaluation. And the theory basically is that the more adaptable a family can be and cohesive they can be, the better they typically tend to function. And so it basically measures or maps out and gives you a little chart with quadrants, 4 quadrants, to show how adaptable and cohesive they are based on 4 different areas. And again, this is a good assessment because it gives you like visual, like here's what the results are that you can then show the family and talk through with them. And then it gives you some things to shoot for, like, hey, you guys maybe are less adaptable in this area or less cohesive. Let's work on that area. And you can work on that area to make them a little more adaptable or cohesive. So adaptability is exactly what it sounds like. Pushing or fighting against change, which is a big one in families, depending on how the family is structured and what roles people play. So those are the more kind of a little more structured types of assessments for marriages and families. I'm going to stop sharing for a second here. Do you guys have any questions about those before we keep going? Just want to make sure I'm going to show you guys I can get it. Get my mouse to work here. Let's see. Let's see if I can share this with you. I'll make this a little bigger so you can see it. This is the circumplex model. So this is this is the way you would be able to see how the cohesion's measured on the top here and the flexibility. And then basically when you do the faces inventory, it will map out. So everyone that takes the inventory will be mapped out in one of these squares. The yellow squares here represent kind of the most healthy in terms of cohesion and flexibility. Anything on the corners obviously is not super great because that's really more on your extremes. And then anything on the outside edge is a little easier to change. The ones on the corners are a little harder to change. And so basically you can give this to, like, let's say a family of 4. You would give this to even the kids, and they would fill out the questions, and then it would give you results of each question per, based on what the family members say. And then you basically put them in one of these squares. And you can see how a lot of times they're in different squares, which means that's their view of their family. Just that right there gives you some questions to ask, right? Because most of the time people don't put themselves in the same square. So looking at this, as you can see, so it goes from disengaged to enmeshed. And then it goes from, chaotically flexible to very rigid. And you don't want to be in the extremes. So that's kind of what that's what this would look like. It's a very good assessment. It comes with a manual. I'm not going to lie. It takes a little bit of training and a little bit of concentration to understand it, because it's really easy for the client to take. It's a little difficult to score, and you really have to practice it to give the results with people. You have to really pay attention, because you're juggling multiple people at the same time. But it's a really good assessment. And it's actually comes with a manual, like a kind of like a little pretty good sized booklet. But that's one that you guys could all do. When I was in my master's program, we gave that at our clinic that we worked at. Every family actually took that. We had a 2-hour intake process for people. They had around an hour's worth of paperwork, and then an hour's worth of us kind of asking questions with them before they started their actual therapy. And if a family came in, they automatically got this faces inventory that we had to score before they came back the next time and report to them on. And then if they had other inventories or other assessments, we'd have to give those as well. But it's a very, very good one. I honestly don't know a lot of people that use it in private practice, because it does take a little more time. But it's super accurate and very, very helpful. So anyway, any questions about any of that stuff that I've kind of talked about tonight?
No, sir. That was helpful.
All right. I'll put those slides up on Moodle so you guys can see them. And so you can see those. That the chapter, I think it's chapter 14 or 13, I can't remember in the book. There's some other assessments that are in there that are good. I just typically highlight the ones that are mostly used by folks. Let me talk a little bit specifically about premarital assessments really quick, because a lot of times premarital counseling is a little different than marital counseling in that, for the most part, when you do premarital counseling, the couple that you're working with, hopefully, is in a really good mood, in a good place, because they're kind of like, on the brink of their marriage, and especially if it's their first marriage. Let's say they're a younger couple, first marriage, they're really excited, they've been dating a little while, they're engaged, they're getting married soon. That's a really fun, that can be an actually really fun kind of sessions. It's a little different if you have couples that come and maybe that's their second marriage, and maybe they're a little bit older and it's their second marriage, but they want to do premarital counseling. Or if you have adults that have never been married and then they get married, or if you have one of them that's been married and one that hasn't, that get married. And then the other thing that a really good premarital assessment needs to assess is if there's, let's say, kids coming with one or both of the couple, then that's another thing that needs to be measured and talked about and discussed. So when you do premarital counseling, basically, my view of it is I want to try to bring up things that first of all, the assessment brings up, hey, you need to address these areas. So those two assessments, the prepare and enrich and SYMBIS that I mentioned, will bring up areas that need to be discussed. That's the first thing. And you need to discuss those. It'll also show strength areas that the couple has. Then you need to discuss those too, and let them say, hey, you guys have some strength in these areas. And that's a good thing, right? That's what you want. So those two things are very important. The other thing that you want to do in premarital counseling, or at least think about, and this is something I started doing about 5 or 6 years ago. I started doing sessions like, I'm going to make these numbers up. We're going to do 8 sessions of premarital counseling, but I want to schedule 2 or 3 sessions with you 6 months after you're married. And then I'll have them come back, and we'll do 1 or 2, maybe 3 sessions 6 months after they're married, because 6 months is a good time frame, sometime in there. I think it's really helpful to do that because depending on if they've been married or not, if you've never been married before and you're super excited, that's great. I mean, that's a good thing. You don't know about marriage until you get married, even if you've lived together. And so you go from me to we, and the we world is a little more difficult to navigate from time to time. And a lot of times you don't know exactly what you need to talk about until you've been in the we world a little bit of time. So that's one of the things that I try to do. The assessments will bring up as much as it can for you to be able to think through and talk about. Prepare and enrich and SYMBIS both are very reliable and valid. They've been very well researched and used in lots of different settings. They're really good ones to use. So those are definitely going to bring up things that are important. I can't even, there's sometimes people ask me like, have you ever had a client that doing premarital and you're like, oh man, you shouldn't be married? That has happened on occasion. But that's not really my job to say, don't get married. My job is to point out like, hey, here's some difficulties you guys might have. Let's talk about those and ask some questions about it and start thinking through it. The only time that in the marriage world, the only time that I have really stepped in and kind of been more directive with a couple is when there's abuse, any kind of abuse between the couple. That's typically when I step in and say, hey, we need to take a break. We need some space. Or do you have a safety plan? What is your plan? And we need to activate the plan, or we need to get that going. I've had to do that a few times, a few as in a handful. That particular type of therapy is a totally different model and form of therapy, altogether different. When you work with couples that have either been in abusive situations or are currently in active abuse. But that's a whole other rabbit trail we could go down. Anyway, any questions about any of those things I was talking about there? Let me take a step back here for a second.
Dr. Bedard,
Yeah.
what type of assessments would you give blended families? Say, for instance, two couples are coming in, they've previously been married, and they're coming in with children and all. What type of, I mean, I guess I'm trying to focus on the family side of what you do. So what type of assessments would you use?
So you can do the same assessments I just mentioned. I would start by trying to assess what their interactions are between the husband and wife. First of all, that's what I would do. When you're talking about working with blended families, then that can actually, if you really wanted to have a niche, that could be a really big niche, because it definitely has a big impact on the couple and the family. Now, there's two ways to look at it. The first way is, if you have a couple that's coming in, let's say that's either newly married or been married a little while, and they both have kids from a previous marriage or relationship. If those kids are, let's say, toddler to junior high, that's one type of blended family to think about. If you have a couple that have kids at, let's say, high school or maybe college, that's a little different. That's a little different type of blended family. The blended family with younger kids, most typically have a lot more involvement from the ex-spouses. There's a lot more custody arrangement talk. There's a lot more going on with maybe, how they communicate with ex-spouses, how they work out custody. There could be still child support issues potentially. As the kids get older, most of the time it changes a little bit. The kids begin to really kind of become the person that talks to the ex-spouse, and not the ex-spouses talk less and less. The kids are really talking to them more and more, especially with phones now. It was way different before cell phones. With cell phones, it changes. The one thing that you can do, and I actually just had to buy this because I gave my other copy away. This is a very helpful book for blended families. Ron Deal has done an extensive amount of research on blended families, and he's done a really good job of kind of pulling that down and making it usable for people. I've heard him speak a couple of times. This is a very good book. He's got a whole library of things that are super helpful. But what it does, honestly, is it helps to walk you through blended families and how they work. He's got some questions in here to ask, like he's got some discussion questions for parents, discussion questions for parents and children of each other. He came up with the concept of intimate insider and intimate outsider. So an intimate insider is the biological parent. An intimate outsider is typically the step or the new parent, and they will typically have those roles for the life of for life. It doesn't mean that you can't have good interactions. That's typically, he just kind of gave names to some concepts that are just kind of been a little bit fuzzy for a long time. He did a really good job of working through it, I think. and he's really, I like him because he's very practical too. And I've actually given this book to, or recommended this book to families to read. But when you do couples work, if you end up doing any kind of couples work at all, you will end up doing something with blended families. If you do family work, you'll end up doing something with blended families. That's just part of therapy in that world. And so there's a lot of really good resources, and he's also a good systems guy. So he comes at it from that approach too.
I heard a quote the other day. It said, it used to be that parents had a lot of children, and nowadays it's that children have a lot of parents.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Because of the prevalence of blended families,
Yeah. If you guys want a little light reading, I don't know where I put it now. I don't know what I did with it. There's a good book that was written about 20 years ago. The Legacy of Divorce is what it's called. It's very good. It's written, it's a longitudinal study about, and it goes, and what it does is it goes back and talks to the children of divorce. And it is a phenomenal, the unexpected legacy of divorce. It is a phenomenal book that still, I'll send the link in the chat. Does a great job of talking about divorce from the standpoint of the kids. And she interviews kids that are younger and older. I mean, it's something that like I said, it's longitudinal. It's super good. And to your point, Jared, there's, there are definitely, some kids that have been through multiple step parents. That happens. And depending on if the parents work on whatever ended the relationship they were in, if they don't work on it, a lot of times you'll repeat those same patterns in new relationships. You don't have to, but a lot of times you do. And I'm not blaming the parents. No one does it on purpose. I've never worked with anyone that was married that was like, oh, I can't wait to get divorced. That's just not true. No one wants to get divorced. That's not anyone's intention. No one ever has that intention. It's just, but it is something that happens, and it's something that you have to know how to work with. Now, in the marriage and family class with Dr. Hubbard, you'll talk a lot more about things like this. You'll get to a lot more of the techniques and how to work with them. I think he's using a lot more emotionally focused therapy now, which is what I use when I work with couples. I'm a big fan of that. Evidence-based, in terms of evidence-based therapy, it's the best evidence-based therapy with couples that there is. All right. Any questions about anything? Good. All right. Hey, so what I would say about when we talk about kind of wrap up assessments with marriages or families, again, the focus of the assessment is not necessarily always on an individual. You're also trying to assess what's happening interaction wise between them. And a lot of times, if we can work on those interactions that happen between them, which obviously means you're doing some individual work with them, but when you can work on those interactions between them, you can really make some powerful changes. And actually, you can make what's called second order changes with families and couples when you make some changes interaction wise. And it really does change. And honestly, if we think about it in terms of generation, if you can help a couple, let's say, make some interactional changes, then you're changing something for generations to come, which is kind of how I look at it, because I kind of think that's important. I'm always trying to think about, like, not just now, but one of the benefits of being a therapist is we can have a 30,000 foot view of something and see not just what bad things are happening, but see the potential that could happen when some things can be changed. And I think that's just something I try to do when I work with couples, not get too caught up in the weeds of the problems, even though those are important to focus on, but also knowing that, there's reasons why people behave and say and do things that they do. So, hey, if you guys don't have any more questions, we'll be done for the night. Anybody have anything they want to ask about anything? Marcy popped on the screen. You look like you're going to ask something.
No, I just wanted to make sure that you saw me, but I heard your question. And
Oh, you're good. You're good. Hey, our next class will be on August 9th. I think it's in a couple of weeks. That'll be our last class. Is there anything I can do to help you guys? Anything I can do to make the class better? Anything I can do to help you understand something better? Anything we can do to make it? I'm going to ask this again at the end, but I'm always wanting to know how we can make things better.
well, I would be like, hey, maybe we don't have to do chart number 3, but that's just me.
Yeah. Okay. I hear you. I hear you.
That's a good one.
That's a good one. There's always one in every class that always wants to know, can we do less work? That probably won't happen.
Well, and make less work for you.
No, that's true. That's true. That's true. That's a good point. I mean, that's a solid argument. It really is.
No, I mean, I've definitely used that opportunity to look at all the different assessments. And I'm sure, as you've read from my little paragraphs, I really struggle with, I'm a huge fan of statistics, but I'm like, everything can be skewed. So, it's all with the.
Well, hang on a second. Let me challenge you.
Uh-oh.
Let me challenge you. All right. So now some of y'all have had me in classes before and know that I get passionate about stuff. So just let me talk about this for a second. What you just said is not necessarily false. You can read statistics in certain ways. That's true. That's true. You can look at a stat and see it from multiple viewpoints. That's true. It's kind of that perspective approach, right? Like even working with people, like we've been talking about tonight. If I work with if a husband might say something and have one perspective, or the wife could have a different perspective. And you could look at a statistic and have different perspectives of it. That part's true. That part's true. The one thing that I will say is when we talk about reliability and validity, those particular statistics, those aren't really there for like measuring obtuse thoughts or phenomenon. Those are there to just give you a reference point of, okay, I look at this, in this case, assessment, right? If I look at this assessment, and if this Pearson correlation is pretty close to 1, then I have a good bet that this will be pretty close to almost no error. Not no error, but close, right? So those particular statistics are different than if I say, give me the statistics of, I don't know, people that shop on a Sunday during the holiday. I mean, you can make up whatever you want to make up, right? here's my last thing, and then I'm not going to go into it. My last thing. We, as a culture, so I'm a researcher, and I wasn't always a researcher. I wasn't always that way. I was probably less so up until I went to school, and then they just beat this stuff into your head. So as a culture, we are skimming the surface of anti-science right now, and skimming the surface of not necessarily like anti-expert, but like we're very cynical and very critical of everything. Not everything, but a lot of things. And I get it. I don't think there's always room for critical looks or critiques. I think that's good, but I'm not a big fan of all the cynicism that seems to be bubbling up. And the only reason I bring this up, to be honest with you, and I'm kind of giving you a hard time, Marcy, more than anything. The only reason why I bring this up is because for the first time ever, I've got two clients right now. One client is in their 60s, one's in their 70s. And with their adult children, they're having major issues because of COVID and because of politics. This is the first time I've ever had something like that happen. One of them is staunchly in one camp and one is staunchly in the other. And they're both super cynical and suspicious and both very negative, right? I'm seeing that more, and I think it's more of a cultural thing that's happening than it is even a personality thing. And so, yes, you can look at stats in lots of different ways. I just don't want us to be super cynical.
I think you and I could have a long discussion about statistics. We don't have enough time to do it in one class period,
No,
or maybe in a lifetime. I don't know.
no. And the only reason why I'm bringing this up is because we've gotten away. We no longer, our world no longer has an expert status. That used to be the thing. There was an expert status for centuries. It was the church for a long time, then it was a government, and then it was a church again, and then it was a government, and then it was like a combination of those. That's gone. Those things are gone. That expert status is gone. Now, because of the internet, we have many experts everywhere. And that's not necessarily great, but it just is. It just is what it is. But yeah, we could talk about that all day. All day. I'm just not a fan of cynicism. I'm definitely not a fan of fear, like bringing up fear and guilt and fear and shame. I'm not a fan of any of that stuff. When we use stats to make people more scared, that's what I don't like. I'm not a fan of that.
No, for me, it's really about, because I'm more of a cognitive behaviorist, so it's very much of, measure it, objective observations kind of thing, all that, and it's like that. But anyway,
But cognitive behavioral therapy, we can't be objective. It's really subjective, right? We're a soft science to begin with. We can't be totally objective. We can't have total objective truth all the time. It's very subjective how you look at it.
Yes, it is.
So, Dr. Bedard, I agree with you that, about how culturally we're skimming the surface of anti-science, but I'm just curious, what do you think is the remedy for that?
The remedy for that?
Yeah, how do we get back?
You really want to know?
Yeah.
I think the remedy is what Marcy and I are doing right now. We're talking about something that I still like Marcy, and she still likes me. And we could disagree about something. Whatever it is. I don't care what it is. We could disagree about whatever, right? And we could seriously agree to disagree, not just say that, but like legitimately agree to disagree. But then after that, I still like you because you're a person, a human being. And I'm not going to go and start throwing darts at you and demonize you because you have a different opinion than me. I think that's part of now let me say, see, now you're going to give me all in this whole thing. Here's the other thing. I think one of the things that's actually happened is that certain parts of our culture have not done a good job of accepting other parts of our culture. We've demonized each other, and it's become more acceptable to do that. And the pendulum swing that's happening, and really it's happening in schools first, and that right now with little kids a lot, is the whole be kind movement. There's a whole lot of be kind, no bully movement, and that's BS because it's not working. If I'm being honest with you. And I'm not saying it's a bad idea, right? The idea is great. It's kind of like prohibition. Prohibition was a great idea. It did not work. It was horrible. It made things worse, right? Like just say no. If you went to school in the 80s, you heard just say no, or the DARE programs did nothing. It did nothing to curtail. And we basically created a war on drugs that made it worse, right? Well, the same thing is happening with the kindness movement. That's I love the idea. I'm a huge fan of being kind. I'm a huge fan. I'm not a huge fan of toxic positivity, which is what's happening. And that's cause and reaction. Here's the third thing that I think is happening. The third thing that's happened is our social media has become automatic platform for whatever anybody wants to say. So we immediately have reactions instead of, we have reactions and experts on everything that come across that way. And unfortunately, the more kind you want to be on there, the more negative and the more kind of messy and nasty it becomes. And so I think all of those things are happening at the same time. But I really think, to me, the answer is more, if we really want to be kind, then really what it starts with is like legitimate, like true kindness is me, like talking to Marcy and being like, I don't think I agree with that, but I like you. You know, I'm not going to like demonize you because you see something different than I do. Or, you know,
It sounds like we've got a good future group session
well,
ahead of us.
that is something that I'm become more and more passionate about, mainly because of what I see it every day. I see these things happening every day. You see it. Honestly, another remedy, Jared, would be, okay, so when COVID happened, we all went inside and we saw the earth basically come back to life and animals come out and all this stuff happened, right? Within 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
If we decided, now this is never going to happen. This is my romanticized version of what I think we should do. This is never going to happen. If we said, you guys get off all social media, all news outlets for 3 months, everybody in the world, this has never happened. But you can try this, and this is a good little experiment. If you get off of it for 3 months, I almost guarantee you'll have your mind will be different in 3 months, because all that does is active. It's all it's doing is activating all the fight or flight system in your brain. It's all it's doing. And if it's on all the time and it's never off, then how do you some people handle that by going inward, and some people handle it by lashing out.
Sounds like a future research project.
Well, it's out
Let
there.
me know when to sign up. I'll sign up.
No, it's out there. You can read about it. It's out there. There's research out there now. There's starting to be more and more research out there about this very thing. It's a legitimate issue, I think. Anyway, y'all don't care about that. We're talking about all kinds of crazy stuff now.
Yeah, there's, just speaking to your whole like be kind movement, anti-bullying thing. There's a pretty funny sketch Chris Rock does where he's talking about how he's enrolling his daughter in a new school. And like the principal is telling him, yeah, we have a strict anti-bullying policy here. And he goes, I pulled my daughter out of that school so fast. He goes, I think parents do 50% of the work and the bullies do the other 50%. Like, I mean,
Well, it's not a kid problem, it's an adult problem. If you're coming from a home that you're being bullied at home, or you're something bad's happening at home, guess what they do? They bring it to school. It's not a kid problem. Kids don't come out. We are not born prejudiced. We're not born racist. We learn those things. We learn those things over time. It's not a kid problem, it's an adult problem. So when I'm not saying it's bad to have anti-bullying programs. I think that's great. I love it, but they're not effective. They don't work. Some of them maybe work better than others, but it's really an adult problem. We got an adult problem. I mean, you can go online right now and find any number of adults interacting with each other in total, like, adolescent ways, fighting with each other, yelling at each other. We had this guy in Montana confront Tucker Carlson the other day in public with Tucker Carlson's kid was right there with him, like, just yelling at him. I mean, that's whether you like that guy or not. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, these are adult people acting like children. I mean, it doesn't make any, adults need to step up our game. We need to become adults. We need to be more adults so our kids want to be adults. I don't even know if that makes sense, but I think it's kind of important. And teachers just feel the brunt of it. So what you're doing now also is you're asking teachers to do like 4 things: teach, which is hard enough; control behavior, which you can't do; liaise with parents; and keep parents happy, which you can't do. And then get paid less than someone with that starts out at Amazon gets paid. This just doesn't make sense. And have horrible benefits. It doesn't make any sense.
And they just cut our summer school. I mean, our summer vacation.
Yeah. And here, oh, by the way, here's a $500 bonus for you, which doesn't even pay for your crappy benefits that you gave me. So, see, I'm all recording this now. If you're watching this at home, this is my rant. I'm done ranting. Anyway, see, Jared, you just opened up the whole floodgates.
no, it's good. I mean, I just like hearing people's like feedback on that. Like, I mean, like it's easy to talk about the problem, but that's why I asked, like, what do you think, like, is the solution?
Yeah, we have to focus.
I'm most interested in.
No, I agree. We have to focus on solutions. And guess what? If something doesn't work, how about we change it and do something else? Why, you know what I'm saying? Like, why keep doing the same thing over and over? And actually, in therapy, if we're counseling with someone and something's not working, and we don't change what we're doing, it doesn't make sense. Like, do something that works. And that comes from the solution focused part of me. So that's solution focused therapy, is basically like, hey, keep doing the things that work, right? If something works, keep doing it. But if something doesn't work, do something else. And so you're not focusing on the problem, you're focusing on solutions. So now what we have in schools, which I think is actually good, but it's kind of sad at the same time, we have school programs that are teaching mindfulness now, teaching meditation, teaching tapping techniques to kids, basically teaching kids to handle their anxiety earlier in their life, which I think is not, again, that's not bad. I think it's good, but it's a little bit sad that you have to do that so that they can go to school. I mean, there's actually a fairly large exodus of students going and doing homeschooling or some form of alternate types of school right now. It's happening, not in this part of the world, but in other parts of the country. It's a mass exodus.
It is in this part of the world too. Enrollment is down all over the state.
Yeah, it's going to be down. It's not going to come back up for a little while either. Yeah. If you like the capitalist piece of people, if you got a group of people together that were smart enough to come up with a new form of education program that could actually work, you can make $1 bazillion, trillion, billion doing it. because our old model started in the early 1900s of the warehouse model, right? It used to be the schoolhouse, right? And then we went to the warehouse, and that's what we still are. We put kids in a big building in a warehouse and hope they, teach them, which is just what we've done. So maybe we need a new model. Now we're talking theory. This is all theory now. And I shouldn't even be the one talking about it. The teacher should be in that conversation, not me. That's what I think. But anyway, we could open the Pandora's box. All right, listen, you guys go do something else and have fun.
Thanks, Dr. Stark.
Have a good night. Thank you.